The stars had been watching Earth for 12,000 years. Not with love, not with hate, with fear. Commander Vorath Kell stood on the bridge of his ship, the Vigilance Eternal, and looked at the wall of energy that stretched across space like an endless curtain of pale blue light. Behind that wall was a small yellow sun. Around that sun was a small blue planet. On that planet lived a species that the entire galaxy had agreed to forget. Humans. Vorath was a Scytheri, a tall reptilian creature with scales the color of dark emeralds and eyes that glowed like molten gold. He had served in the Galactic Conquered Navy for 200 years. He had seen wars and wonders. He had watched stars die and civilizations rise. But he had never been this close to the exclusion zone before. "Commander," said his second officer, a four-armed being named Thessaly, "we are detecting an anomaly." Vorath turned his long neck toward the sensor display. His blood went cold. "That is impossible." The readings were clear. Something had punched through the barrier. Not from outside, where the Concorde's weapons platforms waited. From inside. Something was coming out. "Alert the Primarch Council," Vorath ordered. "Alert everyone." The barrier flickered. A small object emerged from the wall of energy like a fish breaking through the surface of water. It was a ship, but calling it a ship felt wrong. It was made of metal, simple metal. It used chemical fuel for power. It had no shields, no weapons, no faster-than-light drive. It looked like something a child might build from spare parts. "Scan for life forms," Vorath said quietly. "One life form detected," Thessaly replied. Her voice was shaking. "Species identification. Human." The bridge fell silent. Every officer stopped what they were doing. Some of them made religious gestures. Others simply stared at the tiny metal ship floating in space. Vorath had heard the stories, of course. Everyone had. The first directive was taught to every child in the galaxy before they learned to speak. Earth must never be contacted. Humanity must never leave. The seal must hold until the stars themselves die. No one knew why. The reasons had been locked away by the Primarch Council, the ancient founders who had created the Galactic Concord and then fallen silent 10,000 years ago. "What are your orders, Commander?" Thessaly asked. Vorath thought about his orders. He thought about the first directive. He thought about what would happen if he simply destroyed the ship and pretended this had never happened. "Bring it aboard," he said. "Bring the human to me." The human was a female. She was small, with dark hair and dark eyes and skin the color of light brown earth. She wore a simple suit designed for space travel, patched in a dozen places with different materials. She looked tired. She looked afraid. But when Vorath entered the containment room, she also looked relieved. "Thank God," she said. "I thought I was going to die out there. I thought there was nothing beyond the wall." Vorath studied her carefully. She did not look like a monster. She did not look like a threat to the galaxy. She looked like a scientist, which is exactly what she was. "I am Commander Vorath Kell of the Galactic Concord Navy," he said. "You are a human from the planet Earth. You should not exist outside your system. You should not be here." "My name is Elena Chen," the woman replied, "and I have spent 20 years trying to reach this place. I knew something was wrong. I knew we were being hidden. I just had to find out why." "You should not have come," Vorath said. "The first directive is clear. Your kind must never leave Earth." "Why?" Elena asked. The question was simple, but it carried the weight of 12,000 years of silence. Vorath did not answer. He could not answer. He did not know. "You do not know," Elena said slowly. "None of you know, do you? You have kept my entire species prisoner for thousands of years, and you do not even know why." Before Vorath could respond, an alarm began to sound. It was not the normal alarm for danger or battle. It was something older, something deeper. It was a sound that Vorath had never heard before in his 200 years of service. "Commander," Thessaly's voice came through the communication system. "The archive AI is reacting to the human. It is screaming." Vorath felt his scales tighten against his body. The archive AI was the oldest system on the ship, a fragment of technology from the founding era. It contained records that no living being could access. It had been silent for 10,000 years. Now it was screaming. He looked at Elena Chen. She stood calmly in the containment field, watching him with those dark eyes. She did not look surprised. She looked like someone who had finally found the answer to a question that had haunted her entire life. "What are you?" Vorath whispered. "I am human," Elena replied. "And I think that means something more than either of us understands." The news spread across the galaxy like fire. Within hours, every government, every military, every scientific institution knew what had happened. A human had escaped Earth. The first directive had been broken. The seal had failed. Emergency meetings were held on 1,000 worlds. The Synthesis Parliament, the ruling body of the Galactic Concord, gathered in emergency session. Representatives from 4,000 species argued and debated and shouted at each other. Some demanded that the human be killed immediately. Some demanded that Earth be sterilized to prevent any more escapes. Some demanded answers that no one could provide. The Primarch Council remained silent. They had been silent for 10,000 years. They would not speak now. In a dark corner of the galaxy, far from the debates and the fear, a group of ancient scholars called the Archivists of Thalvorn gathered in their dusty halls. They had spent their entire existence studying the fragments of history that survived from before the Concord. They had found pieces of a puzzle that no one else wanted to solve. "The time has come," said the eldest archivist, a being so old that no one remembered what species it had once been. "We must open the Primordial archive. We must learn the truth about humanity." "That is forbidden," said another archivist. "The knowledge is sealed for a reason. The seal is already broken," the eldest replied. "A human walks among us. The galaxy is afraid. And I believe we are about to learn that we have been afraid of the wrong thing." The archivists voted. The decision was made. For the first time in 12,000 years, the Primordial Archive was opened. What they found inside would change the history of the universe. On the Vigilance Eternal, Elena Chen sat in her containment cell and waited. She did not know what would happen to her. She did not know if she would live or die. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She had been right. Earth was a prison. Humanity was being hidden. And somewhere out there, in the vast darkness of space, was the answer to why. She closed her eyes and thought about home. She thought about the billions of humans living their lives under a fake sky, never knowing that the stars they saw were lies. She thought about the generations of scientists who had noticed that something was wrong but had been ignored or silenced. She had broken free. She had found the truth. And whatever happened next, the universe would never be the same. In the depths of the ship, the ancient AI continued to scream. Not in fear, not in warning. In recognition, it knew what Elena Chen was. It knew what humanity was. It had been waiting 12,000 years for this moment, and now, finally, the waiting was over. Elena Chen had known something was wrong since she was a child. She had grown up in a small city, surrounded by normal people living normal lives. She went to school. She played with friends. She looked up at the night sky and counted the stars like every other child on Earth. But something about those stars had always felt strange to her. Something about the way they moved, the way they twinkled, the way they stayed exactly the same year after year. Stars were not supposed to stay exactly the same. Elena learned this when she became a scientist. Stars moved, stars changed, stars were born and stars died. But the stars above Earth never changed. Not once. Not ever. She started to investigate. She built telescopes. She collected data. She ran calculations that should have been simple but gave her impossible answers. The light from certain stars was wrong. The distances did not match. Some stars that should have been visible were simply not there. "You are imagining things," her colleagues told her. "The sky is the sky. It has always been the sky." But Elena knew they were wrong. She could feel it in her bones. The sky was fake. The stars were lies. And somewhere beyond that lie was the truth. It took her 20 years to build a ship that could reach the edge of the solar system. 20 years of working in secret, of gathering materials, of teaching herself skills that no one on Earth possessed. 20 years of being called crazy, being laughed at, being told that her theories were impossible. And then she had flown into the darkness and found the wall. The wall of energy stretched across space like a curtain made of light. It was beautiful and terrifying. It was clearly artificial. Someone had built this barrier around Earth, around all of humanity, and had hidden it so well that no one even knew it existed. Elena had flown through it. She did not know how. The barrier should have destroyed her ship. It should have killed her instantly. But somehow, impossibly, She had passed through unharmed, and now she was here, on an alien ship, surrounded by creatures from her wildest dreams, waiting to learn why her species had been locked away for thousands of years. Commander Vorath Kell visited her cell every day. He asked her questions about Earth, about humanity, about how she had escaped. Elena answered honestly. She had nothing to hide. "Your species is primitive," Vorath said one day. His voice was not cruel, just confused. "You have no faster-than-light travel, no energy shields, no advanced weapons, and yet the entire galaxy fears you. The first directive says you must never be contacted. Why? What did your kind do to deserve such punishment?" "I do not know," Elena replied, "but I intend to find out." Far across the galaxy, the archivists of Thalvorn were reading the Primordial archive for the first time in 12,000 years. The archive was not a computer or a library. It was a living thing, a creature of pure information that had been created in the early days of the universe. It held memories that predated the Galactic Concord. It held secrets that had been deliberately forgotten. The eldest archivist moved through the archive like a swimmer moving through water. Information flowed around it, through it, into it. Images and sounds and thoughts that had been locked away for millennia poured into its ancient mind. What it saw made it want to scream. The records speak of an age before the Concord, the eldest archivist reported to its colleagues. An age of darkness, an age of war. Not war between species, war against something far worse. "What kind of war?" another archivist asked. "A war for survival. A war against beings that we have no name for. The records call them the Hollow." The archivists gathered around the eldest, their bodies trembling with fear and curiosity. The Hollow. The name meant nothing to them. It had been erased from every history, every record, every memory in the galaxy. "The Hollow were not creatures like us," the eldest continued. "They came from somewhere else, somewhere between dimensions, somewhere outside reality. They did not want land or resources or power. They wanted only one thing: consciousness. They fed on minds. They devoured thoughts. They drank the awareness of living beings like water." "How were they stopped?" an archivist whispered. "That is where humanity enters the story," the eldest said. "The records show that humanity was not always on Earth. They were not always primitive. They were the first, the oldest, the original spacefaring species in the universe." Silence fell over the gathering. This was impossible. Humanity was young. Humanity was primitive. Humanity had only existed for a few 100,000 years. The records say that humanity existed for billions of years before any of our species evolved. The eldest continued. "They called themselves the architects. They seeded life across galaxies. They guided evolution. They created the conditions for every civilization that exists today, including ours." "If that is true," an archivist said slowly, "why do they not remember? Why are they trapped on a single planet with no technology?" "Because they chose to forget," the eldest replied. "When the Hollow came, the architects fought them. They possessed an ability that no other species has ever shown. The power to reshape reality through collective thought. The power to deny the existence of things that should exist. The power to unmake." The eldest paused, letting the weight of this revelation settle over the gathering. The architects defeated the Hollow. But the war cost them everything. They were dying out. Their civilization was in ruins. So they made a choice. They erased their own memories. They devolved themselves into primitives. They hid on a remote planet and locked themselves away from the universe. They became human. "But why?" an archivist demanded. "Why would they do such a thing?" "Because the Hollow were not destroyed, only contained, only locked away in a prison at the heart of the galaxy. The architects knew that one day, the prison would weaken. One day, the Hollow would return. And when that day came, the universe would need the power that only humanity possesses." The eldest archivist looked at its colleagues with eyes full of ancient sorrow. "We did not lock humanity away to protect ourselves from them. We locked them away to protect them for ourselves. They are not prisoners. They are weapons, sleeping weapons, waiting to be awakened when the darkness returns." "And has that day come?" an archivist asked quietly. The eldest did not answer. It did not need to. They all knew the truth. Strange things had been happening across the galaxy. Ships disappearing, colonies falling silent, barriers weakening, the hollow were returning. And humanity, the sleeping architects, were the only hope the universe had. On the Vigilance Eternal, Elena Chen woke from a dream she could not remember. Her head was pounding, her body was covered in sweat. Strange images flashed through her mind. Burning galaxies, creatures of impossible geometry, a war that had lasted for millions of years. She looked at her hands. For just a moment, they seemed to glow with a faint golden light. Then the light faded, and she was just Elena again. Just a scientist from Earth who had asked too many questions. But something had changed. Something inside her was waking up. Something old. Something powerful. Something that had been sleeping for 12,000 years. She did not know it yet. But Elena Chen was not just a human. She was an architect. And the universe was about to remember why it had been afraid. The scientists aboard the Vigilance Eternal did not know what to do with Elena Chen. They had run every test they could think of. They had scanned her body with machines that could see individual atoms. They had analyzed her blood, her cells, her brainwaves. What they found made no sense. Her genetic code is impossible. The chief scientist reported to Commander Vorath. He was a small, furry creature with 6 eyes, and all 6 of them were wide with confusion. The basic structure is normal for her species, but there are sequences in her DNA that should not exist. They are not natural. They were placed there deliberately. Placed there by whom? Vorath asked. I do not know. But these sequences are old. Not thousands of years old. Billions of years old. They predate the formation of her planet. They predate the formation of her star. Vorath felt his scales tighten. That is not possible. No. The scientist agreed. It is not. And yet, here she is. Elena was brought to a special laboratory where more advanced tests could be performed. She did not resist. She was curious to learn what they would find. The dreams had been getting stronger every night. Visions of places she had never been. People she had never met. Wars she had never fought. Something inside her was waking up, and she wanted to understand what it was. We are going to expose you to certain frequencies of light, the chief scientist explained. These frequencies have been found in ancient artifacts across the galaxy. No one knows what they do, but your genetic code seems designed to respond to them. Do it, Elena said. The lights came on. They were not bright, but they were strange. Colors that Elena had never seen before. Colors that should not exist. They washed over her body like water, and something inside her began to stir. The memories came like a flood. She saw the universe when it was young. She saw the first stars being born, the first galaxies forming, the first planets cooling from balls of fire into worlds that could support life. She saw herself, or someone who was also her, standing on the surface of an ancient world and looking up at a sky filled with endless possibility. She saw the architects. They were human. They were her. They were the first conscious beings in the universe, born on a world that no longer existed around a star that had long since died. They had watched the cosmos unfold around them. They had reached out into the darkness and begun to shape it. They built ships that crossed galaxies in moments. They created technologies that seemed like magic. They seeded life on barren worlds and guided evolution toward intelligence. Every species that existed, every civilization that had ever risen, owed its existence to the architects. And then the hollow came. Elena saw them in her visions. Creatures that were not creatures. Beings that existed outside the rules of reality. They had no bodies, no faces, no form that made sense to a human mind. They were hunger given shape. They were emptiness that wanted to be filled. The hollow did not kill. They consumed. They drank consciousness like wine. They fed on thoughts and memories and dreams. A single hollow could empty an entire world, leaving behind billions of bodies that still breathed but no longer thought. Shells without minds. Empty vessels that had once been people. The architects fought them. They fought for millions of years. They developed weapons that could hurt the hollow, shields that could slow them down, strategies that could hold them back. But the hollow kept coming. They were endless. They were patient. They were inevitable, until the architects discovered their true power. Elena saw it happen. A moment of desperation. A moment of absolute need. A group of architects, surrounded by hollow, with no weapons and no hope, reached out with their minds and did something that should have been impossible. They denied the hollow's existence, not with words, not with machines, with pure, collective thought. They believed, with every part of their being, that the hollow were not real, that they had no right to exist, that they were nothing, and the universe listened. The hollow screamed as reality rejected them. They dissolved, unraveled, ceased to be, not destroyed, unmade, erased from existence as if they had never been. The architects had discovered the greatest power in the universe, the power of collective belief, the power to reshape reality itself through the force of their will. But this power came with a terrible cost. Each time they used it, they lost part of themselves. Their memories faded, their bodies weakened, their civilization crumbled. They won the war against the hollow. They pushed the creatures back, trapped them in a prison at the heart of the galaxy, sealed them away behind barriers of pure thought. But the victory left them broken. The architects were dying. Their species was almost extinct, so they made a choice. They could not destroy the hollow completely. The creatures would always exist, waiting in their prison for the day they could escape. And when that day came, the universe would need the power of the architects to defeat them again. The remaining architects gathered on a small, young planet orbiting a small, yellow star. They erased their own memories. They locked away their powers in the depths of their genetic code. They devolved themselves into primitives who knew nothing of the stars or the wars or the terrible power they possessed. They became human. And then they asked the young species of the galaxy to protect them, to seal them away, to hide them from the hollow and from themselves until the day they were needed again. The young species agreed. They built the exclusion zone. They created the first directive. They guarded the sleeping architects for 12,000 years, waiting for the moment when the prison would weaken and the hollow would return. That moment had come. Elena opened her eyes. The laboratory was silent. The scientists were staring at her with expressions of awe and terror. During the test, she had risen into the air. Her body had glowed with golden light. Words in a language that had not been spoken for billions of years had poured from her lips. "I remember," she whispered. "I remember everything." Commander Voreth stepped forward. His face was unreadable, but his voice was soft. "What are you?" he asked. Elena looked at him. She looked at all of them. These young species that her ancestors had created, had guided, had loved. She felt sorrow for the burden they had carried. She felt gratitude for their faithfulness. She felt responsibility for what was coming. "I am human," she said. "But I am also something else, something older. I am an architect, and I think it is time for my people to wake up." The news reached the Synthesis Parliament within hours. The primordial secret was finally revealed. Humanity was not a young, primitive species. They were the oldest beings in the universe, the creators of all life, sleeping weapons waiting to be used against an enemy that had been forgotten for thousands of years. Some species reacted with fear, some reacted with anger, some reacted with worship. But one reaction was universal: hope. The signs of the Hollow's return had been appearing for years. Ships vanishing, colonies falling silent, barriers weakening. The galaxy had been holding its breath, waiting for a disaster that it had no way to prevent. Now, finally, there was a chance. The architects were waking up. The power that had defeated the Hollow once could defeat them again. But first, someone had to go to Earth. Someone had to tell 8 billion sleeping humans what they really were. Elena volunteered. It was her responsibility, her destiny, her choice. She would return to the world that had been her prison. She would look up at the fake sky that had hidden the truth, and she would set her people free. The universe was depending on it. The darkness was spreading. Across the galaxy, reports flooded into the Synthesis Parliament. A colony of 3 million beings on the outer rim had gone silent. When rescue ships arrived, they found the colonists still alive, still breathing, but empty. Their eyes were open, but there was nothing behind them. Their hearts were beating, but their minds were gone, consumed, devoured, hollowed out. The word spread quickly. The Hollow had returned. More incidents followed. A passenger ship carrying 10,000 travelers vanished without a trace. A military outpost reported seeing shapes in the darkness between stars, shapes that moved in ways that physics did not allow. A scientist studying the ancient prison at the galaxy's core sent one final message before her transmission cut off. "The barriers are failing. They are coming through." Panic spread faster than the news. Species that had been at peace for millennia began preparing for war. But how do you fight an enemy that does not have a body? How do you kill something that exists outside of reality? There was only one answer. The architects. The sleeping humans of Earth. Elena Chen stood on the bridge of a Concorde flagship, watching the stars stream past as the fleet traveled toward her home world. Behind her vessel flew 300 ships from a dozen different species. They were not coming to invade Earth. They were coming to beg for help. "Are you ready for this?" Commander Vorath asked. He had insisted on coming with her. Over the past weeks, he had become something like a friend. "No," Elena admitted. "How do you tell 8 billion people that everything they know is a lie? How do you explain that they are not human? Not really, that they are ancient beings who chose to forget their own power?" "I do not know," Vorath said. "But you are the only one who can." The fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the solar system. Elena looked at the exclusion zone, the barrier of energy that had kept her people prisoner for 12,000 years. From outside, it looked like a wall of pale blue light, beautiful and terrible. "Lower the barrier," Elena said. The Concorde engineers hesitated. This was the first directive. This was the law that had governed the galaxy since before their species existed. But they had their orders. Slowly, carefully, they began to shut down the generators that powered the exclusion zone. The wall of light flickered, faded, died. For the first time in 12,000 years, Earth was free. Elena's ship descended through the atmosphere alone. The other vessels remained in orbit, waiting. This was something she had to do herself. She landed in a field outside a major city. Within minutes, she was surrounded by confused humans with cameras and phones and questions. The authorities arrived shortly after, along with military vehicles and nervous soldiers. Elena did not fight. She did not run. She simply stood in the field and waited for the world to come to her. "My name is Elena Chen," she said to the cameras that broadcast her image to every screen on Earth. "I left this planet 3 months ago. I passed through a barrier that has surrounded our world for 12,000 years. I discovered that we are not alone in the universe. And I discovered something else. Something that will change everything you believe about who we are." She told them everything. The architects, the hollow, the great war fought across billions of years, the sacrifice that humanity's ancestors had made to save the universe, the power that slept in every human being, locked away in their genetic code, waiting to be awakened. The reaction was chaos. Some people believed her. Some people called her crazy. Governments issued statements. Scientists demanded proof. Religious leaders proclaimed miracles or hoaxes. The world argued and debated and screamed at itself. But that night, something changed. Across the planet, people began to dream. They dreamed of stars being born. They dreamed of galaxies spinning in the darkness. They dreamed of a war fought against enemies that had no faces, no forms, no mercy. They dreamed of power, vast and terrible and beautiful. They dreamed of who they had been before they forgot. Elena felt it happening. She stood in a television studio, surrounded by journalists asking her questions, and she felt the awakening spreading across the world like ripples in a pond. "It has begun," she whispered. A journalist grabbed her arm. "What has begun? What is happening to people?" "We are remembering," Elena said. "We are waking up." The dreams grew stronger each night. People started exhibiting abilities that should have been impossible. A child in India made objects float with her mind. A man in Brazil spoke languages that had never been invented. A woman in Canada looked at a broken machine and somehow knew exactly how to fix it, even though she had never studied engineering. The world was transforming. The sleeping architects were stirring, and in the darkness between stars, the hollow felt it. They had been waiting for millions of years. They had been patient because they had no choice. The prison at the galaxy's core had held them, but nothing holds forever. The barriers were cracking, the seals were weakening, and soon, very soon, they would be free. But now they sensed something that made them pause. A familiar energy, a power they had not felt since the ancient war that had nearly destroyed them. The architects were waking up, the hollow were afraid. On Earth, 2 weeks after Elena's return, the transformation accelerated. People stopped fighting about whether the truth was real. They could feel it in their bones. They could see it in their dreams. They knew, with a certainty that went beyond words, that Elena had told them the truth. Gatherings formed across the planet. People came together to share their dreams, to practice their awakening abilities, to learn what it meant to be an architect. They were still human. They still had their memories, their personalities, their loves and fears and hopes. But now they had something more. A connection to something vast and ancient. A power that was slowly, steadily growing. Elena traveled the world, helping people understand what was happening. She was not a leader, not really. But she was the first to awaken, and that meant something. We are not weapons, she told a crowd of 10,000 people in New York City. We are not tools to be used by the galaxy. We are the architects. We created life across the universe. We guided evolution toward intelligence. We sacrificed everything to save existence itself. And now we must do it again. The crowd was silent. Then a voice called out from somewhere in the back. How? How do we fight something that cannot be touched? How do we defeat something that eats minds? Elena smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who understood the terrible truth of what was coming. We do not fight them with weapons, she said. We fight them with belief. We looked at the hollow millions of years ago, and we told the universe that they did not deserve to exist. And the universe listened. Reality itself rejected them. She raised her hand. Golden light flickered around her fingers, faint but growing stronger every day. That is our power. That is what makes us architects. We do not just live in reality. We shape it. We decide what is real and what is not. And when the hollow come, we will stand together, all 8 billion of us, and we will tell the universe the truth. Her voice rose, carrying across the silent crowd. The hollow do not belong here. They never did. And this time, when we deny their existence, we will not just push them back. We will unmake them completely. Forever. The crowd erupted in cheers. People raised their hands toward the sky. And for a moment, the entire gathering glowed with faint golden light. 8 billion minds, slowly connecting, slowly awakening, slowly preparing for the battle that would decide the fate of everything. In the darkness at the galaxy's core, the prison cracked. The hollow poured out in numbers that would have driven any observer insane. Billions of them. Trillions. An endless tide of hunger and emptiness rushing toward the light. They were coming for Earth. They were coming for humanity. They were coming to finish what they had started millions of years ago. But humanity was no longer sleeping. Humanity was awake. And humanity was ready. The hollow came like a tide of darkness. From the shattered prison at the galaxy's core, they spread outward in all directions. They did not travel through space like ships. They moved through the spaces between spaces. The cracks in reality that only they could see. One moment, a system would be peaceful. The next moment, the hollow would be there, descending on worlds like a plague of shadows. The Galactic Concord tried to fight. Fleets assembled from 1,000 species, carrying weapons that could shatter moons and crack planets. They fired everything they had at the hollow. It did nothing. The weapons passed through the creatures like light through smoke. The hollow did not even seem to notice. They simply continued forward, reaching for the minds of the defenders, hungry for the consciousness that burned inside every living being. One by one, the great fleets fell silent. Ships drifted without purpose, their crews empty, their minds consumed. The Concord's defensive lines collapsed. There was no way to stop the darkness. And then the hollow turned toward Earth. Elena Chen stood in a field outside New York City, surrounded by millions of people. Across the planet, billions more were gathered in similar groups, connected by a bond that had been growing stronger every day. The awakening was complete. Humanity remembered what it was. Humanity understood its power. Humanity was ready. Above them, the sky began to change. The stars disappeared one by one, blocked out by something vast and terrible. The hollow had arrived. Trillions of them, a swarm that stretched across the entire solar system, descending on Earth like a storm of absolute darkness. The Concorde fleet, what remained of it, formed a desperate barrier between the hollow and the planet. Commander Vorethkel stood on the bridge of the Vigilance Eternal, watching the approaching nightmare with eyes that refused to look away. All ships, open fire, he ordered. The fleet unleashed everything it had. Beams of energy bright enough to burn stars. Missiles carrying enough power to crack continents. Weapons that had been designed to fight the worst enemies the galaxy had ever known. The hollow passed through it all without slowing down. Hold the line, Voreth commanded. Give humanity as much time as possible. His crew obeyed. They knew they were going to die. They knew their weapons were useless. But they fought anyway. because that was what they had been created to do. The architects had seeded their ancestors across the galaxy millions of years ago. Now it was time to repay that gift. On Earth, Elena felt the moment approaching. The Hollow were close enough now that she could sense them. Cold, hungry, empty. They wanted to consume everything. They wanted to drink the consciousness of every living being in the universe until nothing remained but silence and darkness. She closed her eyes. Around her, millions of others did the same. Across the planet, 8 billion minds reached out toward each other, connecting, merging, becoming something greater than any individual could be. The architect power awakened fully. Golden light erupted from every human being on Earth. It poured upward into the sky, a pillar of brilliance that lit the entire planet like a second sun. The light connected, merged, grew stronger. 8 billion minds became one mind. 8 billion voices became one voice, and that voice spoke. You are not real. The words were not spoken aloud. They were spoken in the language of reality itself. They echoed through dimensions that humans had forgotten existed. They rang through the fabric of space and time. You do not belong here. You have never belonged here. You are nothing but emptiness pretending to exist. And we deny you. The Hollow heard the voice. For the first time in their endless existence, they felt something that might have been fear. They knew this power. They had faced it before, millions of years ago, when the architects had pushed them back and locked them away. But this time was different. This time, the architects were not weak and dying. This time, 8 billion minds stood united, their belief absolute, their will unbreakable. You are not real, the voice said again. And this time, you never will be again. Reality listened. The universe itself seemed to shiver. The laws of physics bent and twisted. The boundary between existence and non-existence grew thin. And in that moment, humanity did what the Hollow had always feared. They unmade them. The Hollow screamed. It was not a sound that could be heard with ears. It was a vibration that shook every atom in the galaxy. They tried to fight. They tried to resist. But they could not deny the truth that 8 billion minds were speaking directly into the heart of reality. They were not real. They did not deserve to exist. They were nothing. One by one, the Hollow dissolved. They did not die, because they had never truly lived. They simply ceased to be. The swarm that had covered the solar system began to disappear, unraveling into nothing, erased from existence as completely as a dream fades upon waking. The process took hours. Elena did not know how long. Time had lost meaning. There was only the connection, the unity, the power. 8 billion minds working together, believing together, denying together. When it was over, the sky was clear. The stars had returned, and the Hollow were gone, not just from Earth, from everywhere. The architect power had reached across the galaxy, found every trace of the Hollow, and removed them completely. The prison at the galaxy's core was not just sealed. It had never existed. The Hollow had never existed. Reality had been rewritten to exclude them forever. Elena opened her eyes. The golden light faded slowly. Around her, millions of people stood in stunned silence, tears streaming down their faces. They had felt it. They had been part of it. They had saved the universe. In orbit, Commander Vorath watched in awe as the darkness disappeared. His ship was badly damaged. His crew was exhausted. But they were alive. Against all odds, against all logic, they were alive. The Hollow, his sensor officer said slowly. They are gone. Completely gone. Every sensor in the fleet confirms it. There is no trace of them anywhere. Vorath let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. The humans did it, he said softly. The architects did it. Days later, Elena stood before the synthesis parliament. The chamber was vast, filled with representatives from 4,000 species. They looked at her with expressions she could not read, but she understood the emotions behind them. Awe, gratitude, fear, respect. The Hollow are gone, Elena said. Her voice carried across the chamber. This time, they are gone forever. We did not just push them back. We erased them from existence. They will not return. A murmur passed through the parliament. One of the representatives rose to speak. What happens now? It asked. Humanity is awake. The architects have returned. Does this mean you will rule the galaxy as you did before? Elena shook her head. No. We are not who we were billions of years ago. We are still human. We have human lives, human dreams, human problems. We do not want to rule anyone. She looked around the chamber at all the species that her ancestors had created, had guided, had loved. But we will be part of the galaxy now. We will work with you, trade with you, learn from you. The exclusion zone is gone forever. Earth is free, and whatever the future holds, we will face it together. The Parliament was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, the representatives began to rise from their seats. Not in anger, not in fear, in respect. It was not worship. Humanity had not wanted worship, but it was acknowledgement, recognition, gratitude for the sacrifice that the architects had made millions of years ago, and for the victory they had won today. Elena bowed her head and accepted it. 3 months later, Elena stood on the observation deck of a conquered station, looking down at Earth. The planet looked the same as it always had. Blue oceans, green continents, white clouds drifting across the surface, but everything had changed. Humanity was building its first starships. Real starships, not the crude vessel Elena had used to escape. Humans were visiting other worlds, meeting other species, taking their place in the galactic community. The architect knowledge was slowly returning, remembered in dreams and recovered from ancient archives scattered across the galaxy. Commander Vorath joined her at the window. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the planet turn. "Do you ever regret it?" Vorath asked finally. "Waking up? Sometimes I think it must be easier to sleep, to not know what you really are." Elena thought about the question. She thought about her life before, when she was just a scientist with too many questions. She thought about the weight of the architect memories, the responsibility of being part of something so vast and ancient. "No," she said finally. "We were always going to wake up. The universe needed us, and we answered. That is what architects do. We create, we protect, we sacrifice." She smiled. "And now, finally, we get to live again." She turned away from the window and walked toward the door. There was work to do. There was a universe to explore. There was a future to build. Behind her, the stars burned bright and eternal, watching over the children who had created them so long ago. Humanity was home. And this time, they would never forget who they really were. The universe was safe. The architects had risen, and the story was just beginning.